The boy with no name. The airport was loud in the way that only large, busy places can be loud, not just with sound, but with movement, with urgency, with the quiet desperation of hundreds of people all rushing towards something, all afraid of missing something, all carrying invisible weights behind their polished shoes and rolling suitcases. The lights overhead were too bright, the kind of white light that makes everyone look a little tired, a little older than they really are. Announcements crackled through the speakers every few minutes in 3 different languages, and the smell of coffee and jet fuel mixed together in a way that should have been unpleasant, but had somehow become the smell of departure, of leaving, of the world moving forward whether you were ready or not. Victor Bellini walked through that airport like a man who owned the ground beneath his feet, and in many ways he did. Not literally, of course, though his lawyers had once looked into it, but in the way that powerful men own spaces simply by entering them. People moved out of his path without realizing they were doing it. Security staff straightened their backs when they saw him coming. Even the noise of the airport seemed to quiet slightly in the few feet of air immediately surrounding him, as if the world itself was offering him a small, personal silence out of respect, or perhaps out of fear. Victor Bellini was 51 years old, and he had spent 30 of those years building an empire that most people only whispered about. He was not a large man in terms of height. He stood perhaps 5 feet 11, maybe an inch more depending on the shoes, but he carried himself with a density that made him seem enormous. His hair was dark silver, cut close and precise. His suit was charcoal gray, made by a tailor in Milan who had once told him it was the finest work of his career. His watch cost more than most people earned in 2 years. His face was sharp and weathered, the kind of face that had seen things it would never speak about, that had made decisions no decent man should ever have to make, and had somehow learned to carry all of it without flinching. Behind him, at a respectful distance of exactly 3 paces, walked 2 men. Their names were Enzo and Carlo. They had worked for Victor for 11 years and 8 years respectively. They spoke only when spoken to, moved only when needed, and between them had a combined ability to neutralize almost any physical threat that existed in the known world. They wore dark suits similar to Victor's, but slightly less expensive, and they carried within their jackets things that the airport security had been politely persuaded not to scan too carefully that morning. Victor was heading to Gate 47. His private aircraft, a Gulfstream G700 with cream leather seats and a sleeping cabin that he used more often than any bed he owned on land, was scheduled to depart in 22 minutes. He was not concerned about being late. The plane did not leave without him. The plane never left without him. That was one of the small, specific pleasures of having the kind of money and the kind of influence that Victor had accumulated over 3 decades of ruthless, brilliant, and often deeply dangerous work. Time, for Victor Bellini, was not something that ran away from him. It waited. He had places to be. There was a meeting in Zurich, a meeting that had taken 4 months to arrange, involving men from 3 different countries and one conversation that could shift the balance of a particular kind of power in ways that most people would never read about in any newspaper. Victor had prepared for this meeting the way he prepared for everything, completely, quietly, and with no room for error. Every detail had been considered. Every possible outcome had been mapped. Every person at that table had been studied, assessed, and understood. Victor Bellini did not walk into rooms unprepared. He had not done so since he was 21 years old, and the lesson he had learned then about what happens to unprepared men in dangerous rooms was one he had never needed to learn twice. He was walking past the large central hall of the terminal, the place where the coffee shops and the gift stores clustered together, and where families gathered in messy emotional groups to say goodbye or hello, when he felt it. A pull on the left side of his jacket. Not a hard pull, not aggressive, not the kind of motion that would have made Enzo or Carlo move forward. Just a small, quiet tug repeated twice. The kind of pull that only small hands make. Victor stopped walking. This was unusual. He did not stop walking in airports unless he chose to. He looked down. The boy was perhaps 5 years old, perhaps 6. He was small for whatever age he was, with dark curly hair that needed cutting and large brown eyes that were swimming, not quite crying yet, but dangerously close, the way a glass of water trembles when it's too full and someone is carrying it across a room. He was wearing a pale blue t-shirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it, and his sneakers were the kind with small lights in the soles that blinked when he walked. He had a small backpack shaped like a turtle strapped to his back, and he was holding onto the fabric of Victor's jacket with both hands, not letting go, staring up at Victor with an expression that Victor had never seen directed at himself in his adult life. It was not fear. It was not calculation. It was not the careful, practiced neutrality that most people put on when they looked at him. It was just pure, raw need. The kind of need that has no strategy behind it, no agenda, no awareness of danger. The boy looked at Victor the way people only look at someone when they have absolutely no other option, and they know it. "Help," the boy said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Please, I can't find my mama." Victor looked at the boy for a long moment. He did not move. Behind him, Enzo had stepped forward slightly, instinctively, then stopped when he realized the threat was a child in dinosaur-print sneakers. Carlo stood very still, watching Victor's face for instruction. "Let go of my jacket," Victor said. His voice was quiet. It was always quiet. Men who needed to raise their voices to be obeyed, Victor had long believed, were men who had not yet fully understood power. The boy did not let go. He held on tighter. "I can't find my mama," he said again, and this time the first tear came, rolling down his left cheek in a slow, inevitable line. "I've been looking. I can't find her. I've been looking for a long time." Victor felt something shift in his chest. He was not accustomed to things shifting in his chest. He had spent a great deal of his adult life making sure that nothing shifted in his chest, that everything inside him stayed exactly where he put it, organized and contained and sealed behind the same walls that had kept him alive and functional through things that would have destroyed other men entirely. But there was something about the way this child was looking at him, something about the complete absence of fear in those dark, wet eyes, the absolute trust that Victor, this stranger in an expensive suit, would be the one to help, that found a crack in something. He reached down and carefully detached the boy's hands from his jacket. Then, before he had fully decided to do it, he crouched down to the boy's level. This was something Victor Bellini had not done in longer than he could remember. He was not a man who crouched. He did not lower himself. But he crouched now and looked at the boy directly and said, "What is your name?" The boy sniffled. "Luca," he said. "How long have you been alone, Luca?" Luca considered this. "A long time," he said. "I was with Mama and then there were lots of people and I looked at a toy airplane in the window and then I looked back and she was gone." He paused. "I'm scared." Victor stood up slowly. He took out his phone and looked at it. 18 minutes to departure. He looked at Enzo. He looked at Carlo. He looked back down at Luca. And then he did something that surprised everyone present, including himself. "Enzo," he said, "call the gate, tell them we are delayed." Enzo blinked. In 11 years, Victor Bellini had never been delayed. Flights had been held, meetings had been rescheduled. Entire schedules had been rearranged around Victor's timeline. Victor himself had never been delayed. "Sir," Enzo said, uncertain if he had heard correctly. "Tell them we are delayed," Victor repeated in exactly the same tone, and that tone, calm, absolute, requiring no repetition and tolerating no further question, made Enzo reach immediately for his phone. Victor looked down at Luca. "Come with me," he said. "We will find your mother." Luca looked up at him with those enormous wet eyes, and without hesitation, without a moment of the calculation that adults always brought to Victor, reached up and put his small hand inside Victor's large one. And Victor, who had not held another person's hand since he was a small boy himself, closed his fingers around it and began to walk. They started at the information desk in the center of the terminal. Victor approached the counter. The young woman behind it looked up and immediately straightened in the particular way that people straightened around Victor, even when they did not know specifically who he was, some animal instinct responding to the particular quality of his presence. "There is a lost child," Victor said. "His name is Luca. His mother is somewhere in this terminal. Make an announcement. Every entrance and exit is to be watched. No one leaves this terminal until the mother is located." The woman opened her mouth, perhaps to explain that she could not actually restrict the entire terminal based on one man's request. Then she looked at Victor's face more carefully. She made the announcement. They waited. Luca stood close to Victor, close enough that his small shoulder pressed against Victor's leg. He had stopped crying, but his eyes were still full, still trembling. He held Victor's hand with both of his now, the way children hold things they are afraid to drop. Victor stood very still and let him. Enzo stood 6 feet back, watching the crowd. Carlo had quietly positioned himself near the main entrance. The announcement came through the speakers. Would the parent or guardian of a young boy named Luca please come to the central information desk in Terminal B? It repeated in 2 other languages. Then silence. They waited 3 minutes, 5 minutes. No one came. Luca looked up at Victor. "She didn't hear," he said. "She's probably looking for me. She gets really scared. Her hands shake." He paused. "She cries," he added matter-of-factly, the way small children report facts about the world. "When she can't find me, she cries. I don't like it when she cries." Something in Victor's jaw tightened slightly. "Then we will go find her," he said. "Where were you when you got separated?" "Near the big windows," Luca said. "There were airplanes outside and a toy one in a shop." They moved through the terminal, the odd procession of them, the powerful man, the small boy, the 2 silent figures in dark suits trailing at a careful distance. People stared. Victor did not notice, or if he did not care. He was focused entirely on the task in front of him because Victor Bellini, when he committed to something, gave it everything. This was not a small thing. This was not an inconvenience to be managed. This was a child who needed his mother, and somehow, without fully understanding why, Victor had decided that this mattered. They searched the area near the windows. They checked the gift shop where Luca had seen the toy airplane. Luca pointed to it with sudden excited recognition, a small silver model in the window, and something in his face lit up briefly before the fear came back. They asked the shop attendant if she had seen a woman alone appearing distressed, looking for a child. The attendant shook her head. They moved on. Luca, as they walked, talked. This surprised Victor. He had expected the child to be quiet, overwhelmed, perhaps retreating into silence the way people sometimes did when they were frightened. But Luca talked the way some children do when they are nervous, steadily, continuously, filling the space with words as if silence was where the fear lived. He told Victor about his dinosaur backpack and how his favorite dinosaur was the Triceratops because it had 3 horns and was still brave even though it was not the biggest. He told Victor about the cartoon he had been watching on his mother's phone before the flight, and how it was about a bear who learned to be kind even when other animals were mean to him. He told Victor that he was going to visit his grandmother, and that his grandmother made soup that was the best soup in the world. He told Victor that he had lost a tooth last week, and put it under his pillow, and found a coin there in the morning. Victor listened to all of this. He did not tell Luca to be quiet. He did not look at his phone. He walked beside this small, talkative, frightened boy through the bright, busy terminal, and he listened. They had been searching for 37 minutes when Victor's phone buzzed. It was Enzo. "Sir, there's a woman near gate 31. Terminal staff say she has been running through the terminal asking everyone if they have seen a small boy, dark hair, brown eyes. She matches the description." Victor looked down at Luca. "I think we may have found your mother," he said. Luca's face transformed entirely. The fear left it all at once, replaced by something so bright and so complete that it was almost painful to look at. "Mama," he said. It was the most certain he had sounded about anything since Victor had met him. Just that one word and all the relief of the world inside it. They moved quickly now. Through the terminal, around the slow-moving crowds, past the coffee shops and the gate numbers, toward 31. Victor could feel Luca pulling forward, straining toward something, and he held the small hand securely without holding it back, keeping him safe without keeping him still. They came around a corner, and Enzo was standing near a row of seats pointing forward. And there, standing in the middle of the walkway, turning in desperate circles, her bag clutched against her chest and her face streaked with tears and her eyes scanning every face in every direction, was a woman. She was young, perhaps 30, perhaps a little older. She was wearing a simple gray coat and dark jeans, and her dark hair was coming loose from whatever she had tied it with that morning, falling around her face in the particular disorder of someone who has been running and searching and not thinking about how they look for a long time. She was not remarkable in the way that powerful people are remarkable. She was remarkable in the way that people are remarkable when you see them completely, fully exposed, completely real, stripped of every surface and pretense by pure fear and love and desperation. She was beautiful in the way that truth is sometimes beautiful, even when it hurts. And then she turned, and she saw Luca. And Luca, who had been walking very fast, now broke into a run, pulling free of Victor's hand, running with everything in his small body toward this woman who was already running toward him, already dropping her bag, already reaching out both arms in that gesture that is the same in every language and every country and every century, the reaching of someone who loves something and has been afraid of losing it. They met in the middle of the corridor. She caught him and lifted him, and held him against her with the kind of desperate, complete embrace that shows you exactly how frightened a person has been. She was crying. Luca was crying now too, his earlier composure finally dissolving into the full noise of relief and safety. She said things to him quickly, quietly, in a voice too low for Victor to hear from where he had stopped, a respectful distance back. She pressed her face into his dark, curly hair. She held him as if she was afraid that if she loosened her grip even slightly, the world would take him from her again. Victor stood still and watched this. He did not know what expression was on his face. He was not entirely in control of it, which was deeply unusual. After a long moment, the woman raised her head. She looked around, and her eyes found Victor standing there in his charcoal suit with his silver hair and his two silent men behind him. And she understood somehow that this was the person who had brought her son back to her. She took one step toward him, her son still held tightly against her hip, and she opened her mouth to speak, to thank him, presumably, or perhaps just to look at him more clearly in the bright airport light. And then the color left her face, all of it, in one instant, as if something inside her had turned off a switch. Her mouth stayed open, but no words came. Her eyes, dark, tired, tear-streaked, went wide, and in them Victor saw something he recognized immediately because he had spent 30 years learning to read the faces of people who were afraid of him. It was recognition. She knew him. Not as a stranger who had helped her child, but as something else, as something specific, something she had not expected to find in this airport, on this day, in this particular corner of the world. She knew exactly who Victor Bellini was, and from the way her arms tightened around Luca, unconsciously, protectively, as if bracing against something, Victor could see that knowing who he was had just changed everything. His mind, always precise, always working, turned over this information quickly. He studied her face, the dark eyes, the shape of her jaw, the way her features arranged themselves in fear and recognition, and something very old, buried very deep, moved inside him, something he could not name, something that made his breath, just for a moment, not come as easily as it always did. "Who are you?" he said. His voice was quiet. It was always quiet. But this time the quiet was different. This time it was the quiet of a man who already suspects the answer is going to be the most important thing he has ever heard. She looked at him. She looked at Luca. She looked back at Victor, and her eyes filled again, not with relief this time, not with fear exactly, but with the expression of someone who has been carrying a secret for so long that they have almost forgotten what it felt like to put something down. And they are standing at the edge of that moment now, the moment of putting it down. She said his name, not Victor, the other name, the one from before, the one only one person in the world had ever called him, in a time so far back that he had almost convinced himself it had belonged to a different person entirely. And in the bright, loud, indifferent airport, with flights departing and announcements playing and the whole ordinary world continuing all around them, Victor Bellini felt the ground shift beneath his expensive shoes. And for the first time in 30 years, he had absolutely no idea what came next. The weight of blood. The airport continued its endless rhythm around them, the rolling of suitcases across polished floors, the distant calls of gate announcements, the shuffle of thousands of strangers moving toward destinations that had nothing to do with the three people standing frozen in the middle of that corridor. But for Victor Bellini, time had stopped completely. The world had narrowed down to this woman's face, to the name she had just spoken, to the impossible echo of a voice he had buried so deep inside himself that he had almost forgotten it existed. She had called him Vital, not Victor, Vital, the name his mother had given him before he had grown up and hardened and become the man that newspapers whispered about and governments pretended not to know. Vital, the name from before everything, from the small apartment with the cracked windows and the smell of his mother's cooking and the sound of his sister's laughter filling rooms that had nothing in them except love and poverty and the kind of hope that poor families hold on to because it is the only thing they can afford. No one had called him that name in 31 years. No one alive even knew it anymore. He had made certain of that. And yet this woman, this frightened, exhausted, tear-streaked woman holding a small boy against her hip, had spoken it as if she had been waiting her entire life to say it. "Who are you?" Victor said again, and his voice was different now. It was still quiet because his voice was always quiet, but there was something underneath it that had not been there before. Something that sounded almost like fear, though Victor Bellini had not been afraid of anything in longer than he could remember. "How do you know that name?" The woman looked at him, and in her eyes Victor could see the war happening, the desperate calculation of someone who has spent years building walls around a secret and now stands watching those walls begin to crumble. She held Luca tighter against her body unconsciously, the way animals hold their young when they sense danger nearby. But she did not run. She did not look away. Whatever fear she felt, and Victor could see clearly that she felt a great deal of it, she faced him directly with a kind of courage that he recognized and respected even in that moment of complete confusion. "My name is Elena," she said finally. Her voice was steady, though her hands were not. "Elena Vasquez, but that is not the name I was born with." She paused, and Victor watched her gather something inside herself, some final resolve, some acceptance of whatever was about to happen. "I was born Elena Bellini. I am the daughter of your sister, Mariana. I am your niece. And Luca," her voice broke slightly on the name, and she pressed her lips together hard before continuing. "Luca is your great-nephew. He is your blood, Victor. He has been your blood since the day he was born, and I have spent his entire life trying to keep him away from you." The words hit Victor like something physical. He felt them in his chest, in his stomach, in the back of his head where old memories lived in the dark like things that had learned to survive without light. He stood completely still and let the information move through him, let it settle into places he had not visited in decades, let it open doors he had locked and sealed and convinced himself he would never need to open again. Mariana, his sister. His little sister with the dark curly hair and the loud laugh and the way she used to grab his hand when she was scared of something, holding on with both of hers, trusting him completely. Mariana, who had been 15 years old when he left home for the last time, when he walked out of that small apartment and into the world of men who offered him power and money and a way out of the poverty that was slowly killing his family. Mariana, who he had sent money to every month for years without ever seeing her face again, because seeing her would have meant explaining what he had become, and he had not been able to bear the idea of watching her eyes change when she understood. Mariana, who had written him letters for a long time, letters he had read alone in dark rooms and then burned, because keeping them felt too dangerous and throwing them away unread felt too cruel. Mariana, whose letters had stopped coming 18 years ago, and who he had assumed had finally given up on him, had finally accepted that her brother was gone and was not coming back. "Mariana," he said, and his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Your mother is Mariana." "Was," Elena said, and the single word carried the weight of something final. "She died 12 years ago, cancer. She fought it for 2 years before it took her." She paused, watching Victor's face, watching something move across it that she had clearly not expected to see. "She talked about you every day until the end. She never stopped believing you would come back. She never stopped loving you even though she knew what you had become. She knew the stories. She read the newspapers. And she loved you anyway, because you were her brother, and because she remembered who you were before you became what you are now." Victor said nothing. He could not speak. Something was happening inside his chest that he did not recognize, something that felt like breaking, except he had broken before in his life, and it had never felt like this. This was different. This was the particular kind of breaking that happens when you discover that something you thought was dead has actually been alive all along, waiting for you in the dark, and now it is too late to save it. 12 years. Mariana had been dead for 12 years, and he had not known. She had died alone. No, not alone. She had died with her daughter beside her, with this woman who now stood before him holding a child who had Victor's blood in his veins. But she had died without her brother. She had died waiting for him to come back, believing until the very end that he would, and he had not come. He had been building his empire, conducting his business, accumulating his power and his money and his fear and his respect, and his sister had been dying in some hospital somewhere, and he had not known. He had not been there. He had failed her in the one way that actually mattered. "Why," Victor said, and his voice was barely above a whisper now, "did you not tell me? Why did no one?" "She did not want you to know," Elena said, and there was something in her voice now that sounded like anger, old anger, the kind that has been carried for years and has become as familiar as breathing. "She wrote to you. For years she wrote to you, and you never answered, not once, not a single letter. She would wait by the mailbox like a child, hoping, and nothing ever came back. The money came, yes, the money always came every month like clockwork, but never a word, never an explanation. Never anything that told her you remembered she existed as a person, and not just as someone who needed your charity." The words cut into Victor in places he had not known could still be cut, because she was right. She was completely right. He had sent the money and he had burned the letters, and he had convinced himself that this was enough, that this was protection, that keeping his distance was the same as keeping her safe. But it had not been protection. It had been abandonment. He had abandoned his sister because he was too much of a coward to face her with the truth of what he had become, and she had spent years waiting for him to be brave enough to come back, and he never had. When she got sick, Alina continued, she asked me to find you. She was dying and she wanted to see you one more time. She wanted to tell you she forgave you. She wanted to tell you she understood. So I tried. I looked for you for months, and do you know what I found? Her voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with something deeper, something that had been building inside her for over a decade. I found out exactly who you are, exactly what you do. Exactly how many people have been hurt and killed and destroyed by the empire you built with the hands that used to hold my mother when she was a little girl. I found out that the brother she loved, the brother she defended to everyone who told her she was foolish for waiting, that brother was a monster. And I could not do it. I could not bring that monster to her bedside and let her see what her love had protected all those years. So I let her die believing you would still come. And I have lived with that decision every day since. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the airport seemed to have gone quiet around them, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Victor stood very still, absorbing everything, letting the full weight of it settle onto his shoulders. He had carried many weights in his life. He had done things that would have broken other men, made choices that haunted him in the few hours of sleep he managed to steal each night. But this was different. This was not the weight of what he had done. This was the weight of what he had failed to do, and it was heavier than anything he had ever carried before. Luca, who had been quiet through all of this, pressed his face against his mother's neck and said in a small voice, "Mama, why are you crying again?" Alina closed her eyes. She held her son tighter, and when she opened her eyes again, she looked at Victor with an expression that contained everything, the anger and the grief and the fear, and underneath all of it, something that looked almost like desperate, reluctant hope. The hope of someone who has given up on something and then found it standing in front of them unexpectedly and does not know whether to run toward it or away from it. "I have spent 5 years keeping him away from your world," she said quietly. 5 years making sure he never knew where he came from, what blood runs in his veins, what kind of family he belongs to. I moved us 3 times. I changed our name. I took jobs that paid nothing and lived in apartments that were too small because the alternative was reaching out to you and letting your money touch him the way it touched everything else in your life. I wanted him to be clean, Victor. I wanted him to grow up without the shadow of what you are hanging over him. And now," she laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "Now he finds you anyway, in an airport, by accident, holding your hand like you are someone he can trust." Victor looked at Luca. The boy had lifted his head from his mother's shoulder and was watching Victor with those large brown eyes, the same brown eyes that Mariana had had, that Victor's mother had had, that somewhere in the deep past of their family had been passed down through generations like a secret code that said you belong to us. And something moved in Victor that he had not felt in so long that he did not immediately recognize it. It was not guilt, though he felt that too. It was not grief, though that was also there. It was something simpler, something more dangerous. It was the feeling of wanting something, wanting to be worthy of the way this child had looked at him when he had asked for help, wanting to be the man that Luca had trusted, even if that man was a fiction, even if the real Victor Bellini was everything Alina said he was. "Alina," Victor said, and his voice was careful now, measured, the voice of a man who is used to negotiating impossible situations but has never before faced one that mattered this much. "I cannot undo what I am. I cannot change 30 years of choices. Your mother deserved better than what I gave her, and you have every right to hate me for it. But that boy," he looked at Luca again, "that boy grabbed my hand today and asked me for help, and I stayed. I missed my flight. I walked through this airport with him for over an hour, listening to him talk about dinosaurs and cartoons and his grandmother's soup. And I did not do it because of blood. I did not even know about the blood. I did it because something in his eyes made me want to be the kind of man who helps lost children find their mothers. And if that man exists inside me, if he is still alive somewhere under everything else I have become, then perhaps that means something. Perhaps that means it is not too late for all of it." Alina stared at him. Her arms were still tight around Luca, protective, uncertain. But something in her face was shifting, the way ice shifts when it begins to melt, slowly, reluctantly, but inevitably. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I am saying that I would like to know my nephew," Victor said. "I am saying that I would like to know you, not as someone who needs my money or my protection, but as family, real family, the kind I threw away when I was too young and too stupid and too desperate to understand what I was losing." He paused. "I am not asking you to forgive me. I am not asking you to trust me. I am only asking you to let me try." to let me earn something I do not deserve slowly over time in whatever way you will allow. Because I have spent 30 years building an empire, Alina. And today, standing in this airport holding your son's hand, I realized that all of it, every deal, every victory, every acquisition of power and money and fear, all of it means nothing. It is empty. And the only thing that is not empty is this, right here, the chance to be something other than what I have been. Alina said nothing for a long moment. She looked at Victor, studying his face the way people study maps of unfamiliar territory, looking for landmarks they recognize, looking for signs of danger and signs of safety. Then she looked down at Luca, who was watching this entire exchange with the quiet intensity that children bring to things they do not fully understand, but know are important. "Luca," she said softly, "this man, the one who helped you find me, do you know who he is?" Luca nodded solemnly. "He's nice," he said. "He listened when I talked about dinosaurs, and he held my hand really tight so I wouldn't get scared." He paused, considering. I think he was a little bit scared too, but he didn't let go. Something broke in Alina's face. It was subtle, a small crack in the wall she had built, a tiny opening that let light through. She looked back at Victor, and this time there was less anger in her eyes. Not no anger, the anger was still there, would probably be there for a long time, might never fully go away. But it was not the only thing anymore. "Mother," she said quietly, "used to tell me stories about you, about when you were young, about how you would walk her to school every morning even though it made you late for your own classes, about how you would give her your dinner when there wasn't enough food and tell her you weren't hungry even though she knew you were lying, about how you promised her when you left that you would come back, that you would make everything better, that she just had to wait." She paused. "She waited her whole life, Victor, and you never came." "I know," Victor said. "I know, and I cannot change that, but I am here now, today, in this airport, because your son grabbed my jacket and asked me for help, and something in me, something I thought was dead, woke up and told me to stay." He took a breath. "Let me stay, Alina, not in the way I stayed away before. Let me stay in the way that matters." The airport moved around them. Announcements continued. Flights departed. People rushed past on their way to destinations and reunions and farewells. But in that small space where the three of them stood, the man, the woman, and the child, something was happening that had nothing to do with any of it. Something was being decided. Something was beginning or ending, or maybe both at the same time. Alina reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I am giving you my number," she said. "You can call once. If that conversation goes well, there can be another, but I am not promising anything. I am not forgiving anything. I am only," she struggled for the word, "I am only opening a door 1 inch. That is all I have to give right now." Victor took out his own phone. His hands, which had never shaken in 30 years of dangerous negotiations and life-threatening confrontations, were not entirely steady as he entered the number she gave him. "1 inch is enough," he said. "1 inch is more than I deserve." Alina looked at him for another long moment. Then she shifted Luca on her hip and turned to go. But before she took a step, Luca reached out one small hand toward Victor. "Bye," he said. "Thank you for finding my mama." Victor looked at that small hand. He thought about all the things his own hands had done over the years. The documents they had signed, the orders they had given, the money they had counted and the weapons they had held and the doors they had closed on parts of himself that he had decided were too expensive to keep. And then he reached out and took Luca's hand gently in his own, shaking it solemnly, the way one adult shakes hands with another. "You are welcome, Luca," he said. "I am glad I could help." Luca smiled, a real smile, bright and uncomplicated, and full of the kind of trust that only children can offer freely. Then Alina turned and walked away, carrying her son down the corridor, and Victor watched them go until they disappeared around a corner and he could not see them anymore. Enzo appeared at his shoulder. "Sir," he said carefully, "the Zurich meeting. We have already missed the original window, but if we leave within the hour, we can still." "Cancel it," Victor said. Enzo blinked. "Sir." "Cancel the meeting, all of it. Tell them I am unavailable indefinitely. Tell them whatever you need to tell them." Victor was still looking at the corner where Alina and Luca had disappeared. "There are things more important than Zurich. I am only just now beginning to understand what they are." He stood there for a long moment, in the middle of that busy airport, surrounded by strangers rushing to catch flights and businessmen shouting into phones and families embracing and separating and living their ordinary, extraordinary lives. And for the first time in 30 years, Victor Bellini did not know what his next move was. He did not have a plan. He did not have a strategy. He had only a phone number saved in his contacts, and a memory of a small hand reaching for his, and the beginning of something that might be hope. 3 days later, he called. Elena answered on the fourth ring. They talked for 27 minutes, careful, hesitant, circling around the edges of things they were not yet ready to discuss directly. She told him about her job, about Luca's school, about the small apartment they lived in that was too far from good public transportation, but had a window in Luca's room that looked out at a tree. He told her about Mariana, about the things he remembered from when they were young, about the way she used to hum a particular song when she was washing dishes, and how he could still hear it sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet enough for old memories to surface. At the end of the call, Elena said, "Luca has been asking about you. He wants to know if the nice man from the airport is going to visit." Something expanded in Victor's chest. Would you allow that? There was a long pause. "One visit," Elena said finally. "1 hour, in a public place, and if anything about it feels wrong to me, if anything about you makes me feel like he is not safe, we disappear again and you never hear from us again. Do you understand?" "I understand," Victor said. "Tell me when and where, I will be there." The visit happened the following Saturday, in a small park near Elena's apartment. Victor came alone, no Enzo, no Carlo, no visible signs of who and what he was. He wore simple clothes, the kind he had not worn in decades, and when Luca saw him and ran toward him across the grass with his arms open wide, something in Victor's chest cracked completely open, and he discovered that what was behind all those walls he had built was not emptiness after all. It was just love, waiting there all along, patient and persistent, and utterly unwilling to die no matter how hard he had tried to kill it. They fed ducks at the pond. Luca showed Victor how to throw bread so the pieces went far enough for the shy ducks in the back to get some too. Elena sat on a bench nearby, watching, her face unreadable but her body slowly relaxing as the hour went on and nothing terrible happened. When it was time to go, Luca hugged Victor around the legs and said, "Come back soon, okay? The ducks like you." Victor looked at Elena over Luca's head. "May I," he asked, "come back?" Elena looked at her son, at the way he was holding on to Victor, at the expression on both their faces, and something in her expression softened, just slightly, just enough for Victor to see. "Next Saturday," she said. "Same time, don't be late." Victor nodded. He reached down and ruffled Luca's dark curly hair, so like Mariana's, so like their mother's, so like the family he had walked away from and never thought he would find again. "I won't be late," he said. "I promise." The months that followed were slow and careful, built one Saturday at a time like a house constructed from fragile materials that required gentle handling. Victor learned things he had never known, how to play games that had rules he did not understand, how to answer questions about dinosaurs with the seriousness they deserved, how to listen when a child talked about their day without thinking about all the other things demanding his attention. He learned that Luca's favorite food was grilled cheese sandwiches cut diagonally, not horizontally, because triangles were better than rectangles for reasons that made complete sense when Luca explained them. He learned that Elena worked 2 jobs to pay for an apartment she could barely afford because she had spent years running from his shadow and had never stopped to build anything permanent. He learned that she cried sometimes at night when she thought Luca was asleep, because the weight of doing everything alone was heavier than anyone should have to carry. And slowly, carefully, he began to do something he had never done before in his adult life. He began to help without controlling. He paid off Elena's debts, but quietly, through channels she would never trace back to him, letting her believe she had qualified for some assistance program that did not actually exist. He arranged for her to receive a job offer from a company that had no idea it was secretly owned by one of his subsidiaries. A job with good hours and better pay, and the kind of stability she had never been able to afford before. He set up a trust fund for Luca's education that would not become visible until the boy turned 18, giving Elena years to decide whether she wanted to tell him where it came from. He did all of this without telling her because he understood something important. She did not want his help. She wanted to earn her own way, to prove that she could build a life without the Bellini name and the Bellini money and the Bellini legacy of violence and power. And he respected that, even as he quietly made her path easier in ways she would never see. Because that, he was beginning to understand, was what family actually meant. Not ownership, not control. Just love, expressed in whatever way the other person was able to receive it. The change in Victor did not go unnoticed by the people in his world. Enzo and Carlo exchanged looks that they thought he did not see. Business associates commented carefully that he seemed different lately, softer, perhaps, or distracted, or less interested in the details that had once consumed him entirely. Rumors began to circulate that Victor Bellini was losing his edge, that perhaps the time had come for new leadership, that the empire he had built was vulnerable in ways it had never been vulnerable before. Victor heard all of this, he understood all of it, and for the first time in his life he found that he did not care. Let them think he was weak, let them think he was distracted, let them make their moves and their plans and their calculations, because he knew something they did not know. He knew that the empire he had built was worth nothing. He knew that the power he had accumulated was empty. He knew that everything he had spent 30 years chasing was just a complicated way of running away from the only things that actually mattered. And now, finally, he had stopped running. On a Saturday morning in early spring, almost a year after the day in the airport, Victor sat on the same bench in the same park where he had first fed ducks with his great-nephew. Luca was playing on the swings nearby, pumping his legs with the fierce concentration of a child determined to go higher than he had ever gone before. Elena sat beside Victor on the bench, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, watching her son with the complicated expression that parents wear when they are terrified and proud at the same time. "He looks like her," Victor said quietly, "like Mariana when she was young." Elena nodded. "I know, sometimes I see her so clearly in his face that it takes my breath away." She paused. "She would have loved him, she would have been the best grandmother in the world." "She would have," Victor agreed, "and I robbed her of that, I robbed both of them of that." He turned to look at Elena directly. "I am sorry, I know I have said it before, but I need you to know that I will spend the rest of my life being sorry. It will never be enough, but I will spend it anyway." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over his, a small gesture, tentative, like someone testing the temperature of water they are not sure they want to enter. "I spent 12 years hating you," she said. "Hating you for what you did to my mother, hating you for what you represented, hating you because it was easier than grieving, easier than accepting that she was gone and nothing could bring her back." She paused. "But this year, watching you with Luca, watching you show up every single week, watching you try so hard to be something different, I have realized something." "What?" Victor asked. Elena looked at him and her eyes were full of something complicated and fragile and real. "I realized that my mother was right about you. Not about everything, not about who you became, but about who you were underneath all of it. She always said there was good in you, that you had just buried it so deep you had forgotten where to find it. And she was right. It was there all along. You just needed someone to help you dig it up." Victor felt something rise in his throat, something that made it difficult to speak. "Luca," he managed after a moment. "That day in the airport, he was the one who found it. He grabbed my hand and he looked at me like I was someone worth trusting, and something in me woke up and remembered what it felt like to be trusted by someone who had no reason to be afraid of me." "Children see things," Elena said. "They see past all the armor we build, they see straight through to the truth." She paused, watching Luca on the swings, watching him throw his head back and laugh as he reached the highest point of his arc. "He loves you, you know. He asks about you constantly. He draws pictures of you at school. His teacher asked me about his Uncle Victor, and I did not know what to say." Victor looked at Luca too. "Uncle Victor," he repeated softly, as if tasting the words. "I do not think I have ever been anyone's uncle before. I do not know how to do it properly." "You are doing fine," Elena said. "You are doing better than fine. You are doing—" She stopped, and when she continued, her voice was thick with emotion she was trying to control. "You are doing what I always wished someone had done for me. Being there, showing up, making him feel like he matters. That is all any child needs, really. Just someone who makes them feel like they matter." They sat in silence for a while, watching Luca play, letting the spring sunlight warm their faces. And Victor thought about all the years he had spent in shadows, in dark rooms, in the spaces between what was legal and what was possible. He thought about all the deals he had made and all the power he had accumulated and all the fear he had inspired. And he understood, with a clarity that felt almost painful in its simplicity, that none of it, absolutely none of it, compared to this. To sitting on a bench in a small park with his niece beside him and his great-nephew laughing on the swings in front of him. This was what he had been looking for all along. This was what the money and the power had never been able to buy. "Elena," he said carefully, "I need to tell you something about my business, about what I am planning to do." Elena's body tensed slightly beside him. This was the subject they had avoided for months. the elephant in every room they shared, the unavoidable reality of who and what Victor Bellini actually was in the world outside these Saturday visits. "I am stepping back," Victor said. "From all of it, not immediately, it cannot be done immediately. There are too many threads to untangle, too many obligations to transfer, too many people who depend on structures I have built. But I have started the process. I have identified successors for the legitimate businesses. I have begun extracting myself from the parts that are," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "that are less legitimate. By this time next year, I will be out entirely. I will be just a retired businessman with too much money and too much free time. And I will spend that time here, with you, with Luca, being the uncle I never was, being the family I should have been from the beginning." Alina stared at him. "You would do that, you would walk away from everything after 30 years. "What is 30 years, Victor said, compared to the rest of my life? What is an empire compared to a child's hand in mine?" He looked at Luca on the swings, at the pure joy on his face, at the way the sunlight caught his dark, curly hair. "I built all of it because I was afraid, because I thought power was the only thing that could keep me safe. But I was wrong. Power does not keep you safe. Power just makes you alone. And I am tired of being alone, Alina. I am so tired of it." Alina was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, she leaned her head against his shoulder, just for a moment, just briefly, but enough for Victor to feel the weight of it, the trust it represented, the fragile bridge being built between who they had been and who they might become. "My mother would be proud of you," she said softly. "Wherever she is, she would be so proud." Victor closed his eyes. He let the spring sun warm his face. He listened to his great-nephew's laughter carrying across the park like music. And for the first time in 30 years, Victor Bellini, the man they called ruthless, the man they feared, the man who had built an empire on shadows and secrets and the quiet exercise of terrible power, felt something he had almost forgotten existed. He felt at peace. Luca came running over from the swings, out of breath, his cheeks flushed with excitement and exertion. He threw himself onto the bench between Victor and Alina, squeezing into the space between them with the absolute confidence of a child who knows he is loved and has never had to question it. "Uncle Victor," he said, looking up with those dark brown eyes that held so much of the past and so much of the future, "will you push me on the swings? I want to go even higher. I want to touch the sky." Victor looked at this child, this miracle, this gift, this second chance he had never expected and did not deserve. He looked at Alina, who nodded slightly, the smallest of smiles playing at the corners of her mouth. And then he stood up, and he took Luca's hand in his own, and he walked with him toward the swings. "Yes," he said, "I will push you as high as you want to go." And as they walked across the grass together, the old man and the small boy, Victor thought about Mariana. About the sister he had failed and the promise he had broken and the years he could never get back. But he also thought about what she had believed about him, all those years, through all of it, that there was good in him somewhere buried deep waiting to be found. She had been right, she had always been right. And finally, after all this time, he had found his way home.